Welcome to the King Institute for Faith and Culture. This is a really special day. It's our fall faculty lecture. If you're new to the King community, you may not know that every year students elect 2 faculty that they want to hear from, and the faculty elect 2 students. This has been going on since about 1959, so it's a time-honored tradition. So today we have our fall faculty lecture. And it's my delight to introduce to you a man that most of you know as teacher and friend. The only people who haven't had him yet are the other half of the freshman class. So he knows everybody. You know him, right? I'm proud to say that Don and I have collaborated for close to a decade, and our primary goal has been to make Foundations of Christian Thought and Practice the very best class that it can be. The best training for King students to teach them how to think as Christians. In an academic community, being a Christian is not primarily about piety and not primarily about service, but instead it's about making Scripture part of the fabric of your life and loving God with your mind. In the same vein, the banner over here on the front one, on my right, your left, is from Romans chapter 2. Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that by testing you may discern what is the good and acceptable and perfect will of God. So, here's my friend, Don Hudson.
Well, good morning. How we doing? Good. Thank you very much for this honor, and I'll say a few more things about this, but thank you, Katie. I chose Katie to introduce this, and there are a couple of reasons for that. Most of you don't know Dr. Vanderbrake, but as she said, we've been working on this class for about 10 years. And one of the reasons why I wanted her to introduce me this morning is because I'm standing here today because of you. And she's actually the one who got me hired, shall we say. And this was back in the day when we were struggling with how do we present the Scriptures and a Christian worldview in a way that is relevant. I'm going to talk about that more in a little bit. But if I can put it this way, how do I talk about a Christian worldview without killing you kids? You know what I'm saying? But also in a way that is deeply relevant. And the last thing we wanted to do was to lose that distinctive. And so I want to honor Dr. Vanderbrake just a little bit this morning. I think King owes a great debt to her. And you may never even see her. She hides away. But there have been mornings where I'll text her at like 4:38, and she'll text me right back. And immediately my thought is, which one of us needs professional help more? But she works constantly for King, and so I'm deeply grateful for you, and I wanted to say that this morning. You need to know that I'm painfully aware that I don't deserve to be here this morning. Now, that doesn't mean I don't accept this as an honor. But essentially, I'm here because of other people. And I'll spare you all people. But I'm here because I've had other people in my life. I've had other professors who lit the fire in me, basically ruined my life, but they lit a fire in me. I'm here because of you as students. And I'm deeply grateful that you've honored me with this. This last summer, spent about 6 weeks doing a Fulbright application. And in the process of that, you have to give your 5 top honors. And this is my second go-round, and I listed these 2 honors, these 2 times. And I mean, for me, is there a greater honor than you choosing this? So thank you deeply. All right, let's get on with it. I want to talk a little bit about what it means to frame a Christian worldview. And let me get to the right slide. Can you see that okay? Yes or no? Yes, good. I've chosen as my title, "There is no map in this map." And as usual, I've stolen it from someone else. I heard this just recently. My family and I went to see a movie, and this phrase was in this movie. And you're going to be really impressed with this. This is Captain Jack Sparrow, right? Did I get that right? And I love Captain Jack, except for the rum and the long hair and the tattoos. Okay, but you get the idea. I love Captain Jack. And I don't know if you saw the latest movie. It was kind of dreadful. But there was this great scene, and of course it's about a treasure map. It's always about a treasure map. And anybody see the movie by any chance? Yeah? I'm sorry. But again, they have a treasure map, and you'll see the young lady in the film. She's an orphan, and when she was given away to the orphanage, her father gave her, which she didn't know who her father was. Her father gave her a map. But it was a map that didn't have words in it. It was a map of the stars. And so basically you have to know astronomy, to get that right, not astrology, astronomy, to be able to read this map. And so in particular, this scene right here, they're arguing about the map because pirates, and I guess you probably know this, but I guess pirates didn't go to high school, definitely didn't go to college, and so the pirates are arguing that it's really not a treasure map because it doesn't have words in it. And so at one point, Captain Jack Sparrow says, "There's no map in this map." And then the young lady who's been educated, she argues, yes, there is a map in this map, but you have to know how to read this map. And I use this phrase basically to say a whole lot of things this morning. I think it kind of communicates a bit of what we're struggling with in 2017 in Christianity. I think there would be a lot of people in America today who would say, there's no map in this map. There's no direction here. And to be very honest this morning, without being depressing, my worry about Christianity, especially in America, is that it has become irrelevant. It doesn't seem to speak to some of the deepest issues. And for me, the tragedy to that, and by the way, I'm not preaching, I'm just telling you, for me personally, the tragedy of that is that Christianity can speak so powerfully and deeply to the human condition and to some of the issues that we're grappling with today. And so on one hand, we have all these issues that are coming down the pike in the 21st century. And on the other hand, we have a Christianity that seems to become increasingly irrelevant. And so there's a map there, but I think we're losing that map, and I think one of the reasons why we're losing that map is we don't know how to read that map. That essentially Christianity is losing its intellectuality. It's losing its reasonableness. And so my basic purpose in life is to hopefully think through what a Christian worldview is, and I think in many cases to try to answer the question, does it even matter? Does it really matter? And my concern is that Christianity, at least in America in 2017, has become deniers and destroyers. We deny science, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. We're known at times as anti-science, as anti-reason, and I think that's not only wrong, but I think that's a tragedy. And so this morning I'd like to talk about what it means for us to be relevant in the 21st century. And if I may say this, I said this in Foundations a couple of weeks ago. I worry about you kids. And when I have conversations with you, you're kind of worried too. And what I mean is, as we get closer and closer to 2050, we're going to wrestle with more and more issues: clean water, clean food, sustaining populations in some places that are exploding, violence against women, terrorism, access for and to technology. And these are pressing issues that I think, as a Christian, we have some answers and we have some solutions. But part of that is understanding that we need to be intellectual about that. We need to be academic about that. And so my invitation this morning is to think through, what does it mean to be an intellectual Christian? What does it mean to be an academic Christian? Now, be very careful with this, because I'm not leaving out faith today. I'm not leaving out passion. I'm not leaving out the work of God. Of course not. But if I could take one slice and try to answer the question, what are we about? And what does it mean to have, as a Christian, a reasonable faith, according to 1 Peter. If you had to boil my life down to one word, and this is how exciting my life is, it would be interpretation. I love this word. If you don't think that word is exciting, let me show you another exciting word. What I really mean is hermeneutics. That's, it just makes my heart beat really fast. I love hermeneutics. I love interpretation. That's what I've fallen into. That's what I'm really interested about. And of course, hermeneutics means essentially the study of a text, the reading of a text. You can see, if you know Greek mythology, you can see Hermes in there, and the god of communication. And hermeneutics is something that if you go to undergrad and you study biblical studies, you go to seminary, you go to grad school and study religion, theology, biblical studies, you're going to constantly come back to hermeneutics, all right? And hermeneutics for centuries was concerned about how do we read, and as we'll see in just a minute, how do we read in such a way that is authentic? How do we read in such a way that actually allows the text to stand? But I want to say this too. Hermeneutics, 50 years ago, was all concerned about the rules for reading, the laws of reading correctly. And again, I'm all for that. And you know that if you've taken the class Foundations with me. Very concerned. The question that I keep bothering you with pretty much every class, where'd you get that? That's part of what hermeneutics is about. And one of the things that we want for you as a King student, as a King graduate, is, believe it or not, you're paying money for this. We want you to be excellent readers. We want you to be really good interpreters. We want you to be able to take a text and be honest with that text and understand it deeply. And so hermeneutics, yes, is the rules of reading, but now in the last 30 to 40 years, we've had a shift in hermeneutics. And so no longer can you just talk about good reading as having the rules down. Now you have to think through, who am I when I read? And this is a great advancement. And again, I'll come back to this. But the idea is, and I'm going back to, have you kids heard of Schleiermacher? Sounds like a great dessert, doesn't it? Schleiermacher, German theologian, basically introduced us to this in the late 1800s when he said, you can have all the tools of reading. You can know the Greek and the Hebrew. I'm talking about now reading the scriptures. And you can be an A+ student, a 4.0 student. You can have all the rules of reading and still misunderstand the text. That's good. And I think what Schleiermacher was saying is, it's not enough just to have the rules. It's not enough just to understand it here. There's a human being that's coming to the text, and there's a human being who's trying to understand the text for a reason, for a purpose. And Schleiermacher said, we need to be serious about that. What is it like to be a thoughtful Christian in the 21st century? I think in the first place, we need to understand that one of the reasons why we're struggling today in the 21st century is we've had two challenges that modernity has presented us with. The first is the philosophic, and the second is the scientific. Let me wax on about that, all right? For the philosophic, it's reason over revelation and rational thinking over private authority. And here's what I'm trying to say. Beginning sometime probably in the 1700s, maybe as late as the 1600s, we had philosophers who came along and said, essentially, and you understand, part of this was a right critique of Christianity in Europe. This was a proper critique of Christianity in the Middle Ages. And it was this. I'm going to really, really simplify it, okay? I'm good at that. Essentially, these philosophers, like Descartes, came along and said, whoa, wait a minute. When I watch you read, when I watch you interpret, when I watch you do your hermeneutics, I've noticed that you've got this belief or this thought when you come to the text, and you've already decided what that text means, and so when you come out of the text, it just affirms what you came to the text with. Did I lose you on that? It is Monday morning. Did you follow me? In other words, we already know what the text is saying, and I bring my worldview to the text, but it really doesn't make a difference because I have predetermined what this text means. And so some of the philosophers, they didn't really get together, but some of the philosophers started thinking through, what does it mean to let the text stand? What does it mean to basically read the text so that I just don't read my worldview into the text? And eventually, they developed what we now call reason, rationality. And it's this idea that there is good reading and bad reading. If you want me to be a person of conviction, here's my conviction. There's bad reading out there, and there's good reading. And bad reading mostly is we come to a text and we've already decided what it says without any tools. And by the way, I'm going to go from preaching to meddling now, but basically, I think this is one of the reasons why the Bible, you've heard me say this before, why the Bible is so boring to so many people. I think one of the major reasons is you've already decided what it says. And so I'll end with this in just a little bit. What does it mean to read in such a way that it challenges us, that it interrogates us? And so one of the great advances of the philosophic, one of the great advances of the period, the modern period, is that we as human beings can no longer read without interrogating ourselves and without good methodology. The second challenge to Christianity has been the scientific. And again, I don't have a whole lot of time with this, but I'll go ahead and get in trouble this morning. If you are anti-science, then in my opinion, you're anti-Christian. That science is one of the greatest advancements. I didn't hear any amens from the science corner down here. Come on, help a guy. Huh? I really believe this. And this is, for me, some of the most embarrassing moments for me as a Christian is, especially around here in the South, to hear them talk about science. And it's one of the reasons why I love being at King is we take the philosophic as a challenge, but we acknowledge it and we embrace it and we use it to help us think better. And we take the scientific and we accept it and the advancements that have been made. And I've really gone to meddling at this point, but one of the reasons why Christianity is irrelevant in certain areas in America today is because somehow we got anti-scientific. And if you are somewhat anti-scientific, I got bad news for you. If you read church history, science wins every time. Galileo, Copernicus, and so forth. And I'll move on from this, but basically Christianity may be challenged by science, but science is not an attack on Christianity. And so we can be fully Christian, and we can be scientific. And by the way, that doesn't leave out, again, faith and passion and those things. And it doesn't mean that science has all the answers. Does science have all the answers? No. All right, moving on. Here's your man. And of course, we all love bacon, don't we? But Francis Bacon was this, it's amazing, and this is about as far as I'm going to go with this. But my understanding is he basically introduced the scientific method. There were many. But Francis Bacon introduced the method of observation and making a hypothesis and testing that hypothesis and being able to repeat that hypothesis. Typically, what I've seen with Christians is we've lived in denial, and then we misrepresent some of the advances that we've made in both of these arenas. But there's one more that I want to talk about, and that is the linguistic challenge. And this is the one, I got a few more minutes, this is the one I want to kind of camp out on, if I may. I've already killed you, I might as well finish it off this morning. But in the last 100 years, we've seen a major shift in philosophy, in literary studies, and in certain arenas of Christianity, and I want to call it the linguistic. So now in 2017, to be a thoughtful Christian, in my opinion, is we embrace the philosophic. Yes, we critique it, of course we do. And we embrace the scientific. Again, we critique it. But I want to argue we also embrace the linguistic, and I think it makes us better thinkers and better Christians by doing so. Let me explain what I mean by that. This guy right here, Ferdinand de Saussure. And de Saussure, have you ever heard of this man? De Saussure, believe it or not, as we sit here this morning in this beautiful chapel, he's deeply influenced much of what we do. De Saussure was a professor. He was a professor at the Sorbonne, and he was a linguist, but he was more of a theoretician when it came to linguistics. And de Saussure essentially did 2 classes on how human beings use and understand language. Really exciting, eh? But it was to graduate students, and it's interesting because the man never published anything. How did he get so influential? Well, he died, and then his students got together, the students who took these 2 classes, and they were like, wow, this was absolutely amazing. Let's all take our notes, kind of put them together, collate them, edit them, and they published, after he died, they published his notes, and we're still grappling with this book today. Because de Saussure introduced the critique of the sign. He introduced the idea that human language is constructed, and so meaning is constructed. That the use of signs is actually arbitrary, and it's determined by the community who uses those signs. And so he did an entire class on the significance. We call it semiotics. And I've got a nice little chart for you this morning. All I want to say is, here's what he said. De Saussure said, essentially, everything in the world is a sign. Everything in the world is a signifier. And we all function according to society by the relationship of the signifier with the signified. Now you're like, oh my gosh, Hudson, you're killing me again, all right? Let me try to make some sense out of that. You're driving down the road today, and you come to an intersection, and there's a sign there, literally a sign, and it's painted red, and I think has 8 sides. Am I right about that? All right. And it has the white letters S-T-O-P on it. All right. That's a sign. That's the signifier. You follow me? Well, as soon as you see a stop sign, it goes off in your head, I got to put the brake on, and we don't even think about this. It's just automatic. And so the signifier is the sign that says S-T-O-P, and the signified is the object. It's the idea that goes off in your head, I better stop. Or for some of you, I better slow down and look for cops and then coast through, right? Again, it can have lots of different significations for us. And here's what de Saussure said. He said that essentially when we read, we're reading a bunch of signs, and what we need to understand is those signs are constructed by our community. And so, for instance, anybody, you've been overseas, haven't you? Did you notice that there are no stop signs in other countries? I'm being ridiculous. But you think about it, and in fact, I've been to a few countries where they don't use red for stop, they use green for stop. And I've been to other countries where they use yellow for stop. And the question is, who decided what those stop signs are going to be? And the answer is, as community, we come together and we decide what our signs mean. Now, here's another thing. The other thing that he really introduced was this idea that not only do we have signs that we as community, we decide what those mean, but also to understand that I myself, I'm an assemblage of signs. And one of the most important things, this goes back to Schleiermacher, one of the most important things we can do is to try to understand who am I and what are the signs that have been given to me, because I've been given a lot of signs. And then what does it mean for me to come to the world and understand who I am as I read my signs? Am I making sense with this? Here's an example. I call it, what do I call it? A Southern semiotic. Semiotic is the fancy word for signs. The Southern semiotic assemblage. You're driving down the road. You see this a little bit around here. I don't know about you, yes? As soon as you see this, okay? This is a sign. What goes off in your head? And my guess is you actually not only have a sign that goes off, you probably have what they call a chain of signification that goes off in your head. And some of us look at that, especially maybe, let's say we're from Colorado, we look at that and we're like, holy moly, how did I get into this place? Did I get that about right? Uh-huh. And then some of us who grew up around here were like, I'm going to cry. I love that. That's my papa's truck. And I'm using a ridiculous example. But it's really interesting. If we did this today, it would be really interesting to hear each one of your responses to a very simple sign, a gun in a pickup truck. And one of the things that de Saussure said, and again, going back to Schleiermacher, is we need to understand that we construct our worlds. We construct our worlds. Now, by the way, does that mean that there is no God? Absolutely not. Does that mean that there is no truth? De Saussure never said that. There is truth, but what we need to understand is we as a community get together and we construct that truth. We say these are the signs that are significant for us. And then we have to be careful, because do you realize the worldview that I bring to that pickup truck? There's so much that's going off inside of me that when I see something like that, and you don't know what it is, but there's so much that I bring to the text. And de Saussure said, we're never going to read well unless we understand who am I when I look at that sign. And I'm going to throw a little Heidegger at you this morning. Heidegger said basically the human condition is we have been thrown into the world. And Christians come along at times and say, oh my goodness, no, that's not true. And the fact is, yes, that's true. Here we are, we're born, and most of us, The worldview that we have, you ready for this? For most of us, the worldview that we have is the worldview that we have grown up with and we have been given. And you ask, Hudson, is that a good thing or a bad thing? And my answer is unequivocally, yes. Yes. And so some of the greatest readers would say, you must bring your worldview to the text because that's where you will understand it. And then de Saussure and others would basically say, but also understand that the human tendency is to read into. I don't like being wrong. I don't like being challenged. When I read the text, when I go to church, I want the church and the text to affirm what I already think, and I think that's our problem. To let the text challenge us. And so de Saussure and those of us would say that truth is a construction, and that sounds so dangerous, but essentially it admits what is true, and it admits that there is a problem with the reader and a problem with language. That's why you go to school. That's why I pick on you with your critiques and your worldview. That's why I keep coming back with the question, where'd you get that? You have this theology, you have that doctrine, that's great. Where did you get that? Did you actually think about that? And I want to say, in case you disagree with this, my guy in the corner here is Martin Luther. Because it was Martin Luther, and I'm going to really, really summarize him according to Hudson's way of thinking, but Martin Luther basically said there's a problem with reading. And the problem with reading is, I as a human being, I'm not trustworthy. That's one of the greatest moments of reformational thinking. I am not trustworthy as a human being. And then secondly, and besides, not only that, there's a problem with language. And it takes years to get to the place where I can become a good reader. And I have to do that in community. You know this guy? I love that. And so what does it do for us as Christians? What does it call for us to do as Christians? And I think essentially for us to think through, who are we as we read? Who are we as we affirm what we believe? I'll give you one example. Let's take the word biblical. What a loaded word. And in some ways, and I'm not whining about this, but I've had this word used against me. I've heard, it's kind of like, well, he knows a lot, but he's really not biblical. Well, what does that mean? When we say somebody's not biblical, now, I've dedicated my life to being biblical since I was about 14 or 15 years old, back in the 19th century. I've dedicated my life to being biblical. What does it mean to be biblical? Now that we live in the philosophic and the scientific and the linguistic, and we're honest about these challenges, but also these contributions. And I think part of it is that we understand it's not an easy issue. Let me give you an example. Ready for this? This is Paul. Are we biblical this morning? If a woman does not cover her head, literally herself, let her also shear her hair off. But if it is disgraceful for a woman to have her hair cut off or her head shaved, let her cover her head. Ooh. Paul's clear here. And back where I went to college, and if you ever want some good stories, come and talk to me about the college that I went to. Betty, easy now. You got to watch it when the librarians get excited. It's the end of the world. But one of my New Testament professors, the guy was absolutely fantastic, Dr. Minnick. He also pastored a church on the weekends, and he, as a Christian, believed that that is a command from Paul, and that we need to obey that command. And so if you went to his church, if you were a woman and you went to his church, you had to wear a hat. And if you are a visitor coming to his church, they had hats for you in the foyer. Which, you understand, this is Muslims do this and Jews do this. And so for him, he was very serious that when you come before God, women should have their heads covered. Now, my question is, why don't we take this verse seriously? Why don't we, cover our heads? And by the way, I'm not going to request that to the administration later. But my concern, especially with Christianity, is to know that sometimes the theologies and the doctrines that we hold on to, we're not being honest about them, and we're not being honest with them. And what I mean is, we need to be very careful when we talk about biblical, because this morning we need to understand that biblical sometimes comes down to your opinion of something. And it's really, really easy to ignore a verse. Or in reverse, it's really, really easy to latch on to one verse. Did you know that the KKK quotes the scriptures? Do you know what the favorite book for the KKK is? They have one book in the Bible. They love this book. They quote it all the time. Leviticus. There are 595 verses in Leviticus. What is it about your worldview that allows you to quote 5 of those verses and leave out the 590? And I think we have to be very honest with this. And we have to say that I made this up. I constructed this worldview. I'm going to skip that. 2 things and I'm done. What does this call us to do as Christians? To be thoughtful Christians, to embrace, again, with critique, the philosophic. To embrace, what was my second point? The scientific, thank you. I was just saying if you're paying attention. And then to embrace the linguistic. I think it calls us to do 2 things. Number 1 is epistemological humility. You're like, what? And that is, believe me, now at this point in my life, I have deep, deep convictions about my faith and about my life. But to also understand that as a human being, now in 2017, I could be wrong. I could actually be wrong. If you come to me and say, Hudson, you're unbiblical, my first response is, wow, let's sit down, let's talk about it. Because you know what? I've been unbiblical in the past. To have humility, to say, I can be wrong. Number 2, to have intelligent interpretation. Welcome to King. And one of the reasons why I love teaching at King, again, I need professional help, but I wake up almost every morning, not so early anymore, but it's like I love coming to campus. And here at King, one of my passions is that you will be an intelligent Christian, that you will be a thoughtful Christian. That you're not anti-science, that you're not anti-philosophic. In fact, these are things that can help us deeply. These are things that can challenge us. I'll say this and I'm done. One of the reasons why I'm a Christian today, when I was 16 or 17, I was a Christian because I thought Christianity had all the answers. now that I'm 58. I'm a Christian not so much because I think Christianity has all the answers. Yes, Christianity has answers, all right, yes. But one of the reasons why I go to church, one of the reasons why I place myself within the Christian tradition is because Christianity is asking all the right questions. Who am I? What does it mean to be forgiven? What does it mean to forgive? What does it mean to live a meaningful life? What does it mean to die? And what impact does that have on my life? Where am I going after I die? Deep, deep question. And it's really interesting, as much as the church, people say the church is irrelevant, but yet when I go to church on Sunday, those people are talking about deep things that matter to human beings. Yeah. Thank you.
We're really happy to have somebody like Don who's pushing us all the time to ask the right questions. To commemorate today, Don, I've got a plaque. So it says Don Michael Hudson, Faculty Lecturer, Fall 2017. Okay, have a great day.